As we go through this unit, we are thinking about ethical decisions that we may have to make at various points in our lives. The ethics of sex and sexuality is complex and, as with many issues, has changed over time. Countries have different laws regarding when and with whom one can have sexual relations. The age of consent, for example, is 16 in Britain, 21 in Madagascar, and between 16 and 17 depending on the state in Australia. We will explore some of the ethical issues around sex and sexuality in this video. La Trobe University has completed 5 surveys of teenage sexual behaviour since 1992, the most recent published in 2014. More than 2,000 students in years 10 to 12 were surveyed across Australia. The results were that 25% of year 10s, 33% of year 11s, and 50% of year 12 had had sex. Many also reported other sexual activity. For example, 54% of all students had received a sexually explicit text message. 50% of students said they were unhappy with the sex education provided by schools. 25% of sexually active students reported having had an unwanted sexual encounter. Half of those students who had not had sex said they felt good about the decision. Some had made the decision for religious or cultural reasons, or under the influence of their parents, but the most important factor was personal decision-making. 78% of students wanted to have children in the future. The increase in sexual activity amongst young people has led to a dramatic increase in sexually transmitted diseases, some of which cause infertility. To oversimplify, religions have in general taken a rather negative attitude to sex. It is something to be kept under control. There are several examples in the Bible of sexual desires leading people astray, as when David's desire for Bathsheba drives him to send her husband into the front line of battle, and when Samson was overthrown because of his sexual behavior. One of the earliest texts of the Hebrew Scriptures, the creation stories of Genesis, have often been related to sex ethics in Judaism and Christianity, often to portray women as subservient to man. However, as Peter Vardy notes, a careful reading of the 2 creation texts shows that God breathed life into the earth, the clay. Indeed, for the majority of Christians who do not read these stories literally, they show God creating life, and only after that creating male and female in God's image. Women, in some cultures, have kept their bodies covered in order not to tempt men. There is no one Christian view about sex, perhaps because, as Anglican theologian Joseph Fletcher notes in his book Situation Ethics, Jesus said nothing about birth control, large or small families, childlessness, homosexuality, etc., etc. Rather, Jesus called people to show love, compassion, and forgiveness in their dealings with others. However, traditional conservative Christianity has held that sex should only occur within marriage and be for the purpose of procreation. Moreover, marriage is a lifelong commitment, and to divorce and remarry is to commit adultery, a view still held by the Catholic Church. Often overlooked in traditional Christian understandings of sex is the erotic imagery of the love poem found in the biblical book of the Song of Songs. What should be the basis of sex ethics in today's world? To take a simplistic utilitarian understanding, that which gives the most pleasure is the best course of action. This may seem to encourage sexual pleasure for its own sake. In other words, the relationship is transactional, as Vardy puts it. Both parties get something out of it. However, the more complex understanding of utilitarian ethics would look for long-term happiness over immediate physical pleasure. In that sense, we might do more damage than good to our happiness by indulging in the immediate pleasures of sex without considering the longer-term effects. Historically, sex has been linked with reproduction, and a woman once pregnant often relied upon a man to support her and her family. However, with advances in science and medicine, there are now many methods of contraception, which goes some way to divorcing sex and reproduction. In the modern world, sex is used to sell products. Much of the media or popular culture encourages the belief that sex is merely physical. This separation raises issues to do with the emotional aspect of sex. Peter Vardy argues that humans are not psychologically equipped to deal with sex as merely a physical pleasure. Some would argue that benefits of contraception are that it allows couples to plan when to have a family, and it can control sexually transmitted infections. It enables casual sex and may perhaps make people less discerning in their choice of sexual partners. Many women in the modern world choose to put off having children whilst they focus on their career, knowing that their chances of conceiving go down after the age of 35. The Catholic Church continues to oppose unnatural forms of contraception. It has been acknowledged in scientific research that sexuality is not black and white. There are not simply heterosexuals and homosexuals. Rather, sexuality is a complex spectrum, as is sex and gender. So a person's biological sex may not match up with their gender expression. Sexual orientation can be thought of as a spectrum, from heterosexual to homosexual. The rainbow has come to symbolize the movement of acceptance of all people, regardless of biological sex, gender, or sexual orientation. The causes of a person's sexual orientation are not fully understood, but currently scientific research suggests that it may be a combination of genetic factors and developmental factors. The Catholic Church holds that it is wrong to engage in a homosexual sexual relationship. The Anglican Church has begun to accept homosexual relationships, even amongst ministers. A different Christian understanding is that our sexuality and sensuality is God-given, like all other features of our being. Sexuality is merely a natural and perhaps integral part of what it means to be human. Greek philosopher Aristotle argued that something is good if it fulfills its nature. If, through certain sexual relationships, humans fulfill their nature, an integral part of which is sexuality, then sex can be perceived as a good. However, precisely which sexual relationships would fulfill human sexuality remains a matter of contention.